Hey everyone, in this video we're going to show you how to draw a baseball. So grab your pencils and let's get drawing. I would suggest the first thing that you can do is use a sheet, which is anything round, to just draw your circle. I think this will really help. You don't have to use like a compass or anything like that. Just do a nice, perfectly round circle to get your drawing started. I just used the lid from a coffee cup. It's a really nice way to get a nice starting point to your drawing. So you might be aware of this, but there's stitching on the baseball. So if you have a baseball, typically what you have is like some red stitching that exists. And in doing so, you might want to, just look at, how can we get the stitching on the baseball. So depending on what position the ball is in, you'll probably have some stitching maybe in a U shape. And if you're going to have stitching in that U shape, what you might have is actually two sets of stitching. So you might have one set over here and one over there, kind of one facing down and one facing up. So in this particular example, what I'm going to do is actually probably just get some stitching this way. Okay, that's rough. And the other stitching will go here and kind of work its way down, because this is a 3D ball, and down over here. Now, I'm doing this really rough. I mean, it's really hard to draw with such perspective, but we'll do some shading and we'll do some stitching. But the first thing that you want to be aware of is that these stitching lines should really be well established before you start drawing the stitches. So what you can do is you can just draw your line over here. And remember, the line should really try to follow this curvature of this baseball. Even right away, I can see that this part looks okay, but over here it's just a little off for my liking. I'm just going to use my brand new eraser and probably just clean this up just ever so slightly. So I think this way is a little better. Okay. Now, in terms of the bottom, what we can do is we can kind of start. I think this should be over just a bit, and we'll probably correct that and just bring this up over here and bring it back down. So I know it looks a little off right now. Once you put the stitching on, I think you'll see that it'll look a lot sharper. And then if any of your curvature is off, you can just erase and just correct. So even for me, I wanted to correct that over there. Okay. The reason that, like for example, these lines don't look necessarily like a perfect circle is because you're drawing a 3D object, and that 3D object is really going to look quite different, right? So just be aware of that. Let's fix this line up as well. I think this is looking too curved. This probably needs to be a little sharper in the curvature, like less curvature, right? Okay, I think that's looking a lot better. The other thing that we're going to do, and this will be done later, is we're going to add some grass over here. And by adding the grass, it kind of creates obviously a sense of realism, because baseball is played on, grass and in an infield with dirt. So we're just going to create a bit more of a realistic effect. So in doing that, we're going to actually eliminate the bottom part of this drawing. So we're actually going to draw the baseball just from the maybe 80% and up. So the grass will be over here. I'll do the grass afterward. I just wanted to point that out, that we're going to be a little less worried about the baseball as it is at the bottom, because the grass blades will be there, okay? So we're going to start with the stitching, and in doing so, I'll let you know that there's actually 108 stitches that would exist on a baseball. The 108 stitches is basically the standard. It's something that's been done for ages, and it's just something that's always been like that. So when drawing the stitching, what you can do is just try to start on the line and move your way back out. The stitching should really try to get as fine of a pencil as possible. This one's pretty good, but the stitching should really, how do I say this? It should all be one. You shouldn't fray. You shouldn't have anything that's really going away. I'm actually going to maybe get a finer pencil point here and just try to get a really fine little piece of this stitching. The stitching is on a slight angle, so this one goes from here and away. I'm just going to keep this process going. And notice that I'm trying to keep this as fine as possible. And that's the best way to kind of describe how to draw like a stitch on a baseball, okay? We'll do some more over here. Around this part, right around here, your spacing is going to be standard, but as you go away, your spacing will be a lot less. So every stitch I draw, we're actually going to do like kind of less and less in terms of the spacing between each stitch. So you can see already I'm starting to go smaller, and over here I have a bit more of an angle, and as I go away, I'm going to have less angling as well. So you're kind of, really what you're doing is you're closing up your angle as you move away, and you're also closing the distance, like you're shortening the distance between stitching as well. If you ever make a mistake in drawing one of the stitches, don't worry, just grab your eraser and fix it. I mean, I might even do that on this drawing here. We'll have to see how this goes. But when you draw stitching like this, it's actually really hard to get it so well done, because naturally, like, you know, we're not machines and we're not drawing this with tools, you know, for measurement. We're really just, well, if you are, I am using just freehand to really put this together. So what I like to do is just kind of wing it, slowly try to get the stitching looking real. And like I said, as you move away, you basically start to go a little bit smaller and closer together. And have a little ridge over there. The stitching that is actually the last stitch over here should have a ridge to it, okay? The same as on the other side. We're gonna have a bit of a ridge over here, and we are gonna go backwards. So we're actually gonna take, well, let's fix that piece that went off. We're actually gonna take each of these stitchings that have been done, and we're just gonna keep it going on the other side. That's really all we're gonna do. So you can draw these little lines going that way. Some baseballs have this kind of angling to it. So this angle was this way, for example, and this angling is gonna be the other way. Notice that? Notice, you see how that's coming together? Basically one way and one the other way, almost like an arrowhead, if you will, kind of like to a point. So people sometimes wonder who invented the baseball. The person's name was Abner Doubleday. So you may have heard of that. A young man named Abner Doubleday invented the game known as baseball in Cooperstown, New York. So basically he invented that, and that was in the summer of 1839, so quite a long time ago. That person went on to become a Civil War hero, and baseball became America's America's beloved national pastime. That's a well-known fact as well. So interesting facts, interesting facts. So we're gonna keep this stitching going. Now, what you wanna do when you kind of draw this stitching is just remember that this kind of line that exists around here is gonna be, you know, that's as far out as you want to go with your stitching, is what I'm trying to say. So over here, you might have some stitching this way, and then we're going to go back and back down as well. Okay. Sometimes with a baseball, the stitching is actually even a little staggered. So notice what I just did. I purposely just tried to offset a little bit of the stitching there. And that's actually for effect. We're really trying to make this as realistic as possible. So there are times when a baseball does have some offset in the stitching. They're sometimes like right aligned, right beside. Sometimes they're just a little bit off. It's very, very fine difference. Like it's actually very different, if you will. So it's not a problem that they're like a little off. So again, smaller as you go away, and that's kind of as realistic as we can get over here. So Keep that in mind. For the bottom part, I think what we'll do is we'll start just in the middle, and we'll get a nice piece of, see, this is a lot closer to us too, so a nice piece of stitching just over here. And we'll get a little more of an angle on that as well. Okay. So we have one piece that way. The other piece is actually just going to come right around here. Okay. And we're going to repeat this process. So just over here, we're going to have another piece. And we'll go back down this way. It can be tedious. This is something that you as an artist are going to find very tedious if you're drawing this. It just takes so much precision, really. It just takes so much back and forth and back, and you're just basically drawing all these little lines, right? So we're using the same principles as before. The lines over here are going to get smaller and closer together as well. That's going to be erased as well because we're going to put grass over there, so just keep that in mind. And then over here, what we'll do is we'll keep this moving. In this particular example of the baseball, what we'll do is we'll just try to show that like the stitching can actually come out this way. And I'll show you more detail after, but this is actually a seam over here. So we're going to start going smaller, 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 smaller. Okay, simple as that. Down over here, you want to basically go out, 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 over here. And again, just as you go away from your main area, the seams should really get smaller. These are probably a little too big over here. I would suggest just erasing anything that you've done that looks a little too, out of line. Now, at this point, what I would say is you could do a few things. You can keep working on the threads, or you can look at the shading of the ball. What I would say is it's probably not a bad idea to actually just give some shading to this. What we'll do is we'll just add some shading around the left side. A light source is going to be coming from the right. If we're going to do that, you just add some light shadows to start, and then we're going to blend it in, and we're going to repeat that. So what you can do is just start dark at the bottom left and work your way up. So this is just the starting point, but I just laid the foundation of the shading, so you can use your smudge technique to really just make this look a lot more realistic. And the reason we're doing this first is because we're going to fix up these stitches after, but it's really nice to have your shading done before you fix your stitches. All we did was lay the foundation for the stitches first. So this is basically how we're doing this. We're just and keep this going. Again, we're going to be dark at the bottom because this baseball is going to be sitting on grass. So definitely darker underneath and to the left, and then lighter as you go elsewhere. So I would say that as you go from left to right, what you can do is start lighting up on the shadows and going lighter, just like this, okay? And then especially over here, you want to be very light because we did just establish that our light source is coming from the right side. So you want to be very light with your shadows on that side. And we're going to go darker, definitely darker on the left side, as well as at the bottom. We'll use a darker pencil later to finish this, But like I said, this is basically the starting point of establishing the shadows on this baseball. I think this is looking pretty good. I hope you're following along. By the way, are you drawing? Are you following along? Are you watching? Let us know in the comments. We love to hear from you. We love to know how you're doing as well. So we're getting there. We're getting there. So this is starting to look a lot more realistic. I would say that hopefully if you're using your fingers, you still have some lead on them. Try to get the lead all around the baseball. If you have some of it that's pure white like the paper, it's gonna look like you missed a spot. So don't be afraid to get your whole baseball just looking a little more realistic, right? So that's great. You know, we're starting to pull this off. I would say that we could probably just remove the bottom. This is something that's just sitting there as filler, if you will. And I think it's definitely something that we can change and adjust. So let's add the grass. So in order to add some grass, I would say that what we can do is just start to draw some blades of grass that go up. And a nice blade of grass will just be a nice straight piece like this. And sometimes blades of grass have like a V shape, so it's almost like two parts to the grass. If you feel like you want a finer pencil, just grab something that's a little more fine. And what you can do is just try to get a few more blades in there as well. The tricky part with grass, when you do draw grass, is there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of blades in there. There's a lot of, you know, blades of grass that you have to kind of put in. So it does definitely take some time. Don't be afraid to commit to that process. Something like this takes time to do, but I promise you, like when you're all done drawing like this field of blades of grass, it looks great. It really, 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 you know, looks very nice. So don't be afraid with the time it takes. Blades of grass are going to come from all different directions as well. So I would say that you can draw it right into the baseball. So you could do one of a few things. You can start in one area and go across, or you can like sparse it out and then add more. I like the second approach. I find that just getting some realistic blades here and there is a nice way to kind of, you know, complete it. So I'm just going to do this over here. And they're all different directions, right? So you might have a blade over here. You might also have a blade of grass over here, even over here. I know at the beginning I put this like rough area of where it is going to be, and I want to erase that because that was not realistic at all, right? So follow along. We're basically just putting blades of grass on. And one of the things that you can get stuck on here is just taking too long to draw blades of grass. I'm more of a fan of like making this more a little abstract and just getting some of these blades just right on the page. If they really look terrible, you can always just erase a piece and put them back. But you know, don't be afraid to kind of show off and quickly just kind of, you know, between an up and down motion, just get some of these blades of grass on the page. I think you'll see that it might look a little more natural than trying so hard to really get these blades of grass drawn, and you're trying too hard and then it doesn't even look right. So that's my experience with drawing blades of grass. So that's what I'm doing now. As I do that, maybe I can give you a few more baseball facts. People often wonder what's like the longest home run that was ever hit. And the longest home run that was ever hit was 656 feet. And still to this day, it was Mickey Mantle. When he was 19 years old, he hit that home run. And 650 feet, I don't know exactly how how long that is. Does it get right out of the park? Does it go to the parking lot? I'm not really sure, but it's quite far. I know that. I know that's definitely quite far. So Mickey Mantle. I know he's before my time, really, but definitely a great baseball player from what I know, what I've heard. So I would suggest you grab a darker pencil as well. You're going to be dark in here, right? The space below, I just sharpened this nice 8B as well. The space below is definitely going to have some nice darker tones in there, and that's really going to show off because, again, like in real life, you're going to have a lot of dark space and dark tones below in the grass. Like the light source coming from over here is naturally going to make, you know, these areas dark, right? Especially on the left. You're probably going to get more darkness on the left, so don't be afraid to get some darkness on the left side as well. So that's what I'm doing right now. And just to reiterate too that like drawing something like this definitely takes time, and part of the reason is some of the geometry of it. You know, when you're drawing something that's like shape driven and shape based, you're really going to be taking your time to make sure that the roundness of the ball is there, or the stitching is there, and the stitching follows that pattern of the stitching kind of goes, changes shape or changes direction. So when you have all of these challenges associated with this type of drawing, it naturally just takes more time. So don't be afraid to, you know, accept that. Don't put pressure on yourself to say, you know, I want to do this drawing, but, you know, I have another drawing I want to do after, and don't get into that trap. I think that's an easy one to get trapped into. So this is true for like baseball as well as like many other different types of drawings that you can do that are geometry based. So anything that is really geometry based definitely has that challenge to it. There's a shadow, there's a deep shadow over here. So what you need to do is get really dark over here. The darkness over here really needs to come through. There's a dark shadow that would exist because your light source is coming probably from over here. So don't be afraid to really get some of these blades of grass, well, quote unquote blades of grass. We're just drawing lines right now, but don't be afraid to get darker just in this area, and that's what I'm doing right now. Okay. In fact, I do have even a darker, you know, charcoal like pencil that can really get this going. So I could probably add that later, but I think for now, I might just want to give it a few hits just to start to establish that darker area as well. So we're going to keep this going. We're going to keep this darkness happening. All right, going back to the 8B. Nothing wrong with getting even more darkness and shadows on the baseball. That was looking way too light for my liking, and I think that you'll agree. Just getting some nice dark tones down there makes this look realistic, so keep that in mind. And you don't want to get too high up. Like I use the darker pencil just here, but you don't want to bring it too high up because it starts to impact the actual, like the look and the integrity of this baseball drawing. So just keep that in mind as well. Just be very careful about how you do that. Okay. All right, so we're starting to put it together. We're starting to, you know, bring this together. We have some of our blades of grass over here. I would suggest maybe grabbing something like a 5B and just start to fix up some of the tips of the blades of grass. And you can do that by just connecting some of these pieces like that, and maybe even just sharpen it up just a tiniest little bit. So if you can do that, you might find that your blades of grass will look a little more realistic. The sharper the pencil, the more realistic your blades of grass will look. And if you feel like any of these blades of grass look out of place, like I kind of felt like some of these were looking a little off, it's because there's not enough blades of grass. So if you feel like yours are looking a little sparse and there's just like one or two random little pieces sticking out, you have to get enough on there to make it look real, to make it look like there's actually enough grass. Like look at any drawing of grass and there's lots of blades of grass for the most part, right? Some blades of grass are going to be very minimal because there's a dry spell or whatever, but just keep that in mind, that real grass drawings are going to have lots of blades of grass. So keep it going, keep it going. We did some darker kind of areas over here, and I would say that you can also just get in some darker areas around this side as well, but not as dark, right? Because the blades of grass are definitely going to be lighter on this side, right? Okay, so we're getting there. I think we could use more grass on the right side. I think we went heavy on the left. So let's just get a few more quicker, kind of abstract, like blades of grass. Switch it up, get some darker tones in here as well. You might be also wondering what's the longest baseball game that was ever played, and that would be 25 innings. So if you're not familiar, the regular standard baseball game is 9 innings. 9 innings will bring you to a full game. If there's a tie, the game continues 1 inning at a time until one team is in the lead at the end of the next inning. Now, if that doesn't happen, they keep going and play another inning and another inning and another inning. So the longest game ever played is actually 25 innings, which was 8 hours and 6 minutes. I think that's like roughly 3 times the average game duration. So if you're wondering, that's a really long game. So take any sport and multiply it by 3, and that's what you'd be looking at in terms of like the duration and the endurance that's needed and to keep up with that as well. So we're just going to keep this going, keep the blades of grass, you know, somewhat in an abstract way as well. Don't be afraid to get some darker tones in here. Realistically, you're going to have some realism in terms of the blades of grass that's drawn, so this is something you definitely want to do. I'm using like a real dark, I think this is a charcoal pencil actually, I just grabbed it. It's a real dark piece, and don't be afraid to kind of use it down here as well. Now this grass could really continue across the whole drawing. I think what we'll do is we'll just probably keep it just in this kind of space to make it look like this baseball is really sitting, you know, right in a nice little nook of grass. Like this grass is really just holding it, like the ball's like tucked into this little grass area here. So that's what we'll do. So I'm fairly happy with the way the grass came out. What I would say is that I might want to grab something like a 5B and just now work on more of the shading of the actual baseball itself. Now, in order to do that, go to your darkest point of the baseball and work your way up. If you're going to do that, just pull the pencil up from the dark and keep it curved. See how I'm getting those lines curved? This is how you're going to get this baseball looking really realistic. And get the dark at the bottom as well. What you then do is you pause and just try to use your smudge technique to let some of these, some of the lead from the pencil just bleed onto the baseball itself. Okay, so we did that. We're pretty good with that. I would get some shading on this side. We already did before, but get some more. This is going to be darker here just because naturally it's somewhat of the bottom of the baseball. So get some darker tones towards the bottom. Use your smudge technique as well. Okay. You could even just pivot to a 7B over here and get some darker tones. Now, if you're gonna get dark over here, I would suggest that you take it one stroke at a time. You don't want this to mix up with the blades of grass. So what you can do is just use your pencil this way in this direction. See how I'm following the shape of the baseball? That's what's gonna make it look even more realistic as well. Okay, so we're getting there. I would suggest grabbing something dark, grabbing a nice dark pencil. Anything dark you can use. So let's use something like a 7B. And what I'm gonna do is actually, well, before I do that, actually, I'm gonna take a step back. I'm gonna use an H pencil, and I'm gonna draw the ridge of this piece over here. This piece right here is literally a ridge of the rawhide, I think it's like leather, right? A ridge of this leather that is actually existing on this baseball. There's actually literally a piece here that is higher up than all of the other parts of the baseball. So we draw that line. And what you want to do is draw, there's kind of like a little tiny hole that would exist around the outside of each of these pieces. So what you want to do is draw the tiniest of tiniest holes, and that's where the stitching is going, right? The stitching is really going right through that hole and through and being sewn together. So these holes that we're drawing are literally where the string, or whatever you want to call it, is being sewn through. So we basically put these on right through, right to the bottom, and we're going to do the same down here. And it could be very light, it could be very, you don't want to press too hard. So those are basically the guide areas of this, and we're going to do the same up here. So when you're drawing your holes, what you can do is just fix up some of the stringing that you've drawn. So don't be afraid to fix that up. Over here, what you can do is you can just draw your circle and then just fix up maybe some of the spacing around it, okay? This is a little tougher if you do make a mistake. It is, I will say, it's a lot tougher to start erasing and fixing. Try to just take your time. If you notice, I'm even trying to take my own time to get this right. But don't worry if you do make a mistake. You can easily fix these up. And then, yeah, towards the end, they get a lot smaller, I think. You'll see that as well. Just tiny little dots as you go away, but in the middle you definitely want to use your perspective. So let's do that. Okay, and we're going to continue this way. All right, so we basically put on the holes in which the string from the baseball exists, right? What you want to do is you don't want those holes to look like they're just kind of sitting in no man's land, if you will, that common phrase. Go over them with your pencil and re-establish the string, like redraw the string and make sure that string kind of has a bit of, well, in this part, like where I'm drawing now, give it just the tiniest bit of curvature like this. The reason for it is, like I said, this little strip of the baseball has actually a curved look and feel to it. There's a bit of a ridge here. So don't be afraid to draw that ridge with your string. Okay, so we're gonna go through and just clean this up. The curvature really only exists in this frontal part. The sides and the back, where they get a little smaller, you don't really see the curvature just because of general perspective. when looking in perspective, you're not going to see it. So you might actually be more inclined to draw the straight lines as you work your way back. Okay. So same at the bottom. At the bottom, you might also have some curvature as well. And notice that I'm purposely using a 7B to just bring out some darker lines with this string on the baseball, because in reality, well, I mean, this is a black and white drawing, but in reality, the string is usually red, or it's actually always red. So if it's red, you definitely want it to stand out, and that's why I'm using a darker pencil as a result, okay? Okay. I don't think I did the top unless I'm forgetting, but we'll do the exact same at the top. And this is also a really good time to just clean up some or any of the lines that were already there. So don't be afraid to just go over some of these lines that you drew. And that's what I'm doing. I did it at the bottom, and I'm going to do it at the top. The top actually looks pretty good, and it looks pretty realistic in my opinion. So we're basically going to just keep this going that way. Now, earlier, I drew the line at the bottom, but I did not at the top. Now, if you're going to draw the line at the top, what you might want to do is not go over those circles, but just go between those circles. Okay. You also don't want that line to be too dark. If it's too dark, it's really just going to look like a sore thumb and just stand out in a way that doesn't look realistic. So what I would say is use your smudge really quickly here, one this way and one this way, okay? Now, the trick to getting that ridge drawn really nicely and really well is the following. You want to get darker away from the ridge. So watch as I just get ever so slightly some darkness happening around the ridge. So I'm referencing the ridge, like that's what I'm going to call the part with the stitching, is this ridge. So and it's a slight change. It's slight in the sense that it's not a giant difference in shading, but it's very subtle and very slight. So I'm purposely making sure that I'm just lightly doing that. Okay. I also, I'm inclined to do that on this side over here, but not everywhere. So what I might want to do is get some of that shading over here around the ridge. But I might be a little less inclined to do that shading around the outer part over here. The reason is because the light source is really bright, for example, in this drawing. So we don't necessarily want that to be shown. So how can I explain that without... Essentially what I'm saying is just get ever so slightly, just get the tiniest little bit of shading over here. And when I say tiny, I mean I'm going very lightly with my pencil. But I'm doing it all over. I want that to carry through all around this zone. So this zone that I'm in, the zone that I'm shading, I want that to really be seen all around there, right? I want this brighter part to be seen and to be clear, to be visually seen. So I might want to just fix this up over here as well. Not fix, but just add a little more darkness so that that bright part pops, right? Also be patient. I mentioned already, but this type of drawing definitely takes a lot of time. especially if you want to do it right. At the top, this is far too bright to match up to the shading in the other parts of this baseball. So you want to just get your pencil and just add in ever so slightly, just a little bit of lead to make sure this looks more realistic. And always go light, because you can always add more. It's a lot tougher to remove shading as well. If you ever look at a nice, smooth professional baseball, that actually looks nice and smooth, just like I've drawn. So keep that in mind as well. Now, we're looking at this here. The interesting thing about a baseball is that where the stitches meet in the middle, there's actually a real nice ridge over here that exists. There's literally a ridge, like I said, but this kind of crevice. Like, we want to create this crevice over here. Notice how I'm just drawing a line and then getting some lines going away. I'm trying to create a 3D effect over here. It's very subtle. It's actually very, very subtle. It's hard to do. It's not always easy. But if you can pull this off, this will make your whole drawing come together. So I'm just trying to add some shading to the crevice. And I'm just going to carry that through right around. You can also use a back and forth method to create a bit of shadowing on both sides. You can kind of go up and down, up and down. Okay. If you've ever drawn a sphere and done some shading on a sphere, this is very, very similar to that concept. This is like the same concept of like, how do you draw a sphere with shadows and shading? This is like the same thing. It just happens to be that you're drawing a baseball, really. So just keep that in mind. If you can remember that, I think you'll actually do a great job at drawing this. So okay, so we did that, and I would say up at the top, we also want to just get our stitch line, or crevice, we called it, the crevice over here. So it starts with a darker line in the middle. The great thing about adding the thicker line right now is that if you were a little bit off center in the first line that you did, you might notice that this is a great way to balance yourself out. So if by chance you were off center, you can use this time to add like a bit of a rebalancing of your spatial alignment as well. So I'm doing what I did at the bottom, was just adding a little bit of flair over here. I'm just pulling out some of these interior lines, and I'm going to do the same over here. Ever so slightly. And the more we are in the center of the ball, the more it's going to be pronounced, right? The other thing is you can just go back and kind of clean up maybe some of this ridge. The ridge kind of disappeared over here, so I would say this is a good time to kind of clean that up as well. Okay, so we're getting there. We're really getting there. How else can I fix this up? How else can I make this look as good as possible? I feel like some of the shape has kind of adjusted, and it might be also because the grass is there. So I'm not saying to like redraw the shape of the ball in the grass, but I'm just doing this to kind of fix the right-hand side. If I can see, I just wanted to fix that part over there. If I can make it look like this ball is kind of tucked in nicely, it might be able to be a little more realistic, right? And that's really what I'm just trying to do right there. So that's all I'm really trying to do. Now, if I did redraw that line at the bottom, you might benefit from seeing that line and just adding that darker tone right down here, because really that ball is there between the grass. So don't be afraid to get that shading back on the ball, which happens to be in the grass, right? So that ball might be sitting in the grass just like that. So nothing wrong with that. I would say that you can also get your coffee cup lid and maybe just fix up ever so slightly, just even some of the top part as well. If you can fix that up, that also might, yeah, see, that starts to look a lot more realistic as well. I really want to do a great job at this, so I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to rush the end part of this drawing, so I'm hoping that you are patient. The other thing that I'm going to do is just fix up some of this grass down below. I feel like the grass, and it's good to not have a sharp pencil at this point, because you want to maybe get some thicker blades of grass, and I'm using just a dull part of the pencil as a result. But I feel like the grass can really be a little more visible at this point, and I just feel like it's not really working for me. And as a result, in an abstract way, but you can see, I'm just trying to draw some thicker blades of grass down at the bottom, pull it down, just making this look as realistic as possible. So hopefully you're seeing that as well, and a little bit up here as well. So how did you do? How did your drawing come along? Are you happy with what you have? Are you still working on it? Are you maybe just following along just to kind of see how this comes together? Either way, I'd be really curious to know how you did and how this went for you. So please, let us know in the comments. Leave a comment or a like or a subscribe is always great. We love, we love drawing for people that, want to kind of see some things on an ongoing basis. It's really nice to have that level of commitment from our audience as well. So if you'd like to subscribe, that's great. I just want to re-accentuate that ridge. The ridge is important, and in this case I feel like it maybe has disappeared just a touch, and I just want to get that back on here. So that's all I'm going to do. Those holes that you drew originally should not be looking like they're just standing out in just kind of a circle. They should really be looking like they're the inner part of where the string goes in. So for example, over here, if there's a hole where it just looks like it's on its own, get the pencil on top of it and just add a few lines on top. You're gonna kind of close up some of the gapping there, and it'll look a lot more realistic as well. Even over here, some of these circles look like they're just floating, and you don't want that. So hopefully you see that. Hopefully that's something that you're able to kind of improve if you can. So I would say the last thing is something like a 5B, and probably just get the last bit of shading around the outer part over here. The reason that it's really nice to add this last bit of shading as well is because if by chance your ridging doesn't look as realistic as you want, by adding just a little bit of extra flair with the shadows and shading over here, you're kind of like washing out or dulling out that ridge line. So if that ridge line isn't to your liking, just having the whole baseball one shade darker might actually help like dull out how pronounced those ridges are. So I don't know if that makes sense or not. Hopefully it does. Really what I'm doing is I'm darkening the whole baseball right now. By darkening the whole baseball, the ridge lines don't look so pronounced and so like, you know, stand out-ish, right? That's really what I'm trying to say. Okay, we are almost there, almost there. I would just get the tiniest bit of shadows right over here. I might have mentioned this in a past video, but I used to play baseball as a kid. So I'm a baseball fan. Playing's a little more fun than watching, but if you do watch baseball, it is somewhat fun. It's a slow game, it takes a few hours and usually involves a lot of pitching and running and catching, but it's nice. It's a nice sport to watch. So hopefully are you a fan? Like, let us know in the comments. Are you a baseball fan? Are you a player? Do you play baseball? I'd be really curious to know as well. So let us know. I'm just adding even further shading on the side. I feel like this could really bring this together. And I'm just gonna keep cleaning this up until I'm 100% happy with it. Even over here, I'm not happy with the shortness of these stitching lines. I'm basically going to pull out each stitching line just a tiny bit more, and that's going to help make this look even better. So, as such, you might want to just clean up those holes, right? We're going to extend the holes, if you will. Okay. So this is the part where you want to just fix up anything that's maybe not to your liking. And in this case, I'm extending some of the lines over here, some of the threads, strings, if you will. So that's basically that. Let's see. I think for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this. How did you do with your drawing? Did you pull it off? Did it work for you? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.